Well, good morning, everybody. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so whilst we allow other people time to join.
Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Witter here, the CEO of Apolitical Foundation, Apolitical Academy. I'm really excited to be here with my partner and all things good, Daniel Sachs of the Daniel Sachs Foundation. And we're really excited. Before we start, I want to just get to know everyone a little bit more. I see some of people have introduced themselves in the chat. If you've just joined, please do that. I see Suki from Berlin. We have Katharina from Munster. Go ahead and say your name in the chat, your organization, and where you're from. Lots of Germans here. We have Amsterdam, some Italians, of course our friends in Sweden. So do that. We want to get a sense. And just to make this all real, if people could just move into gallery mode for a second and turn on your cameras, Yvonne and Stella and Valerie and Anna and Robert, just for a moment. And can we just wave at each other? We're real people trying to do real things together, making this more than just another Zoom call. I don't know about you. Anyone? Feel free to stretch and, relax your shoulders, because we're gonna have some fun talking about politics. How often does that come together in the same sentence? So what we're here to do today is to talk about the role of politics and political leadership in achieving the SDGs. And the fact that you've come means a lot to us, because we have things to learn from you, as well as to share some of the things that we are learning. Hello, Robert from Kenya. You're here on your personal interests, but happy to have you, and businesses are a big part actually of democracy reform. So we'll talk more about that. Hello, Robert, nice to see you. Warm welcome. Hopefully it's warmer in Kenya than it is here. So what we're going to talk about today is the role that political leaders play in systems change. I know that sounds obvious, but it's often forgotten. How to build and support transformative political leaders at scale faster, so that we have great people in the system working and thinking about the systemic approach that we need for the SDGs and beyond. And then we're going to get to some specifics about how you can and why you have the opportunity to build better politics, to advance your own organization's mission, let alone our collective work together. So I want to start off with a poll. Matthew, could you wave at everyone? Matthew is the fantastic person at Catalyst 2030. There are always people behind the scenes doing the hard work, so I just want to recognize you for that. A poll and just get some baseline for how you guys, you all are thinking about this. Welcome, Stella. No worries that your camera is off, but another German there, fantastic. So the first question is, how often do you work with politicians? Very often, sometimes, or not at all. If I see a bunch of not at alls coming in, for the people, anyone who said, well, I'll wait just a second. I see 78%. Go ahead, let's close it, Matthew, and show the results. So I'm going to ask someone from each of these categories to say how or why they're doing that. So who answered very often? Could you raise your hand or yell at me? Okay, Susanna or Suki, hello. Could you just tell how you do that? Quickly in like a minute?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I live in Berlin, but I'm actually a consultant working mainly in Bolivia and South America. I advise politicians, I work in development projects, and I work mainly with public leaders, but I've done all kinds of consultancy. Yeah, I could go into more detail, but I work with public institutions, with different regional governments, the national government, but mainly in South America.
Fantastic. Susanna, we're going to get to know each other, or Suki, very quickly. So I'm going to follow up and get your email, and we'll have a walking COVID safe coffee. Who said sometimes? 45% of you. Could someone raise their hand for the sometimes person? Don't be shy. No. Yeah, Veronique. How do you pronounce it?
Veronique.
Veronique. Very good. Veronique.
It's French, but I'm Dutch. But
okay,
you can say Veronique. Yeah, I put in sometimes because I don't know if it's really working with, but it's more trying to engage them, inform them, send them information. So it's not on the level that I really feel that it's a working relationship.
You posted in the chat a new project you have coming up. Could you say a few words about that?
Yes, I'm part of some groups that are trying to engage politicians more with the SDGs. There was, over the last 4 years, we just haven't had elections, so there's a new teams coming up with politicians. But so before there was a campaign that actually, that there were politicians that adopted an SDG. So they were already in the government and we tried to inform them. But now we will sort of turn it around and say, okay, we are going to adopt politicians and just form some sort of a circle around them and feed them with the relevant information of their point of attention within the government. So I don't know, it was just setting it up, so I cannot yet explain fully how we will embark on it. So I was also hoping to get some inspiration in this group. Thank you.
Fantastic. I'd love to talk more about that in our smaller groups, but also later on, because you're doing the work that's a very important principle, which is not just helping get people elected, but also supporting people once they're in office to actually deliver on democracy. Chakri, I see you have your finger in the air. You've been outed by Giroux as not working with politicians. So do you wanna say why?
No, I haven't been because my role at that point didn't demand it. I'm the newest fellow of the European Union School of Governance, and now I want to work with many thinkers and practitioners. So I want to actively engage with governments. My biggest question for Daniel today is coming from a position of privilege. How do I get past that dichotomy of us versus them? And so that's what I've been wrestling with. And my mentor for that is Louis Holzman at the East Side Institute in New York City.
Great. I hope if there's a way to get you and Daniel in the breakout room together, Matthew, no pressure. It may be too hard, but if we can, that would be really, really good. And it's such a woke question, which is part of the thing we need to do, is to get more people in politics who are thinking this way. Fantastic. We have some new people who have just joined. Welcome. If you can, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and where you're from. And don't worry, we're just getting started and getting to know one another. So now I want you to put in the chat, I really like the first word that comes to mind. So we're gonna do a collective hello from Mauritius, UNDP. Really warm welcome here. When I say the word politician, what's the first word that comes to mind? Let's just put it in the chat quickly. Curious what comes up. Dirty, potential ally, silos. Corrupt. Power hungry, decision maker, help, short term.
Is that help as in help or help?
Or both. Responsibility. Fascinating German election coming up this year, but really going to be interesting. Democracy, Stella says. Bureaucratic, no doubt, democracy. Okay, so there's a bit going on in this list, what I call, my background's in behavioral science, called a selection bias. So the people who have responded to this are interested in politics in some way. So I see some positive attributes, but there's also, so you guys are outliers probably overall, but I do see some very common held heuristics or just beliefs about politics in this power hungry, dirty, corrupt, which is also just real. So I wanted to get sort of a group think on where we're at on that, and then we're going to talk about this in our breakout groups. So I want to just step back before we turn it over to you all to share with and give you kind of the state of the political, this is overstated a bit, but the state of opportunity we have in having better political leaders. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to move pretty quickly through some work that we're doing and trying to better understand how to build better politics. So to going to that dirty and corrupt, let me just get to the very top here, sorry. Going for that dirty and corrupt to get to the help, support, or even adopt a politician. So how we think about democracy flywheel. So I co-founded a company called Apolitical, which is a global peer-to-peer learning network for people in government, because how we collectively, I would posit, need to think about democracy is in this flywheel where the people elect the politicians, and that's where Daniel Sachs and if Paul, who you'll meet later, he runs that foundation, is just a big partner in that, work on the political leadership part, and then the politicians give the mandate to the public servants. We have someone from UNDP here to actually go in and deliver it, and politics deliver it. So you can't have effective democracy if that whole flywheel isn't working or part of it is sick or perceived to be sick. And you all know, this is why Robert from PwC, why it's so important here, is that if you look at trust surveys around the world, businesses are the only institution seen as both trusted and ethical. So there's, I think, great opportunity to work with businesses to help build better political leadership. So very happy to have a private sector perspective in these conversations. And Daniel comes from the private sector himself and uses his expertise and resources to do this. So you cannot think about working on the SDGs if you don't think about working with politicians. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the sort of the power structures that exist, both financially and sort of what move needles, the main ones, government and finance, the global goals sit very much in the middle. And we have, things driving, trends driving change, but also sort of major threats. And we would posit that poor political leadership may be, or not supported political leadership, because there are great people who, it just gets hard. Sorry, got a jumpy mouse here, wants to get to your conversation. So I just want to give you a sense of how big the opportunity is that we're leaving on the table if we don't work on better politics. 40% of the GDP is spent by government, 40%. And if you moved half of that more effectively, it would unlock $150 billion, which would help a lot with the SDGs on an annual basis. And the scale of politicians' impact, even one politician's impact, could be very, very good. So you can see, I just use the LA as an example. The average council member has $700 million that he or she decides on an annual basis. And the Ford Foundation's endowments wouldn't cover 2 years of the LA Unified School District. So if we're not thinking about how to work with government and politicians, we will not achieve the SDGs, there's no doubt. And you can see some of these other numbers around GDP drop, around gain, if we do better on corruption. So politicians do the enabling environment and they spend the money. I don't know if we have anyone from some of these cities, but you can see per council member, I know we were supposed to have some folks from Lisbon. There's a lot of money that people in government have control over and responsibility over. And one politician can make a really, really big difference. I mean, just look in my country, we're called Apolitical. Trump said that 85% of people who wear masks get coronavirus. And you could see early days by this leadership influence that someone had, how powerful that was, let alone the ability to block legislation. And what Daniel and I are going to be talking about is how little money is spent actually in supporting people going into political office. And it could be from some early research that the largest amount of money supporting people going into politics could be from the US government, which is fraught in many ways in and of itself. But the social sector spends $29 per person on leadership development. Again, we don't know how much we're doing on political development. And yet the force multiplier effect could be good. If 0.3% of working age people in the US are politicians, that's not a lot per person spend to get that effect of having better, more effective people in politics. And there are people who work in this space like Daniel, but most philanthropists to support this work don't. This is a graphic from a fund in the US. And again, I use US examples because there are more of them. There's not as much going on in other places. You can see in what a healthy democracy here. Anyone notice what's missing from this picture? There are no politicians. There are no politicians, right? So we have people investing in healthy democracy. Maybe they're in civic participation, but I don't think so. Maybe they're in the governing institutions, but that's problematic if we don't see people. And again, here, this is a big donor collaborative in the US working on civic engagement. Again, citizens are nowhere in here except for leadership development. So we seem to have a big hole. And even those of us, Daniel and Paul and Johnny and Anna, my colleagues on the call, care a lot about grassroots and citizen-centered politics. It's very, very true. But something's happened where some grassroots people are seen to hold their ground versus get into the system and use that knowledge and power from the community to go in and actually move the needle. They're seen in separate buckets. So we have work to do. So I want to move to the breakout rooms where we have some very specific questions to ask about this situation, probe a little bit more why we do, why we don't, what would need to change in order to do that. So my colleagues, Johnny, Daniel, who you know, and Paul and myself will be leading the breakout group. So we're really going to be just asking questions and listening to you. There's a Google Doc that Johnny has put into the link that we will be putting in live answers. So Catalyst 2030 can learn and we can learn from you. So Matthew, go ahead and put us in for 15 minutes and we will come back and share the highlights.
Hey, Matthew, can you hear me?
You need to select your room.
I know.
You're sitting, stretch a little bit, Okay, we're not at a conference where we just got a cup of coffee and maybe I spilled it on someone. I'm sorry, just to try to make this a little more human. So let's just do quick, like a top line, most obvious or most exciting or most depressing. I like positive, but if that's what came out of their group. So group one, in a minute, what came out for you?
Group one is me, I guess, with Jeru, Drew, Anna Miller, and Daniel. And we basically, the crux of it was to work with humility and local action committees and work with governments on a straightforward level. That examples that Drew was providing and Jeru is engineering in Catalyst. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Oh, an excellent modeling. Short, to the point headlines. I love it. Group two.
Yeah, so I will quickly summarize what we were talking about. Yeah, we talked about like politicians who are involved with the SDGs, and I was thinking of the major of Bonn, like the one that was there in 2017, just held a speech at the Global Festival for Sustainable Development, I think was like this. Yeah, where I volunteered. So yeah, that was the only touching point I was aware of. But also the current major, Katja Dörner, she's involved in Plan International. And I think if a politician is involved in an NGO, yeah, it might be a good starting point. And then we're talking about Audrey Tang, the government of Taiwan, which is really citizen-centered, and the minister from Finland, and a tri-sector leadership approach, which I will look up a little bit more. And yeah, then we had examples of politicians really leading the SDGs, Maya Yanan, and yeah, philanthropists, we were talking about Daniel Sachs, but yeah. The most we were talking about was about how, what would help. And we, yeah, thought that an openness would be really, really good, accessibility, and that the politicians could be aware of the SDGs and communicate it to the audience and civil society, because we thought that most of our friends don't know the SDGs, and it should be communicated a bit more, but also that it shouldn't be just a buzzword and lose its meaning. And the pandemic wasn't really encouraging to push more sustainability forward, because there were other issues. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you. A lot of ground covered. Katerina, can I volunteer you to give a summary of the good, bad, and ugly from our conversation?
I think our group was pretty varied. We talked about so many subjects, but basically I think there's a glimpse of hope that there's already a lot happening around sustainable development goals, but that data is pretty essential to holding politicians accountable. Also, we talked a lot about Africa, and Robert mentioned that there's not that many technocrats in government, and that they're also missing effective training for politicians. Yeah, I think that was about it. Or does somebody want to add onto that?
Siri, do you want to make the data point?
Sure. We were specifically talking about the philanthropy part, where there might be a sort of a looped reasoning around money going into the system, that because government might be perceived as already well-funded, more money is not necessarily finding its way into the system. So that the data that Lisa showed us earlier is to me, would be very effective to get out in the system, to encourage more to get engaged and see that there is another sort of pivoting to be made.
Fantastic. Group 4. Paul,
well, that's us. We had a great discussion about the SDGs and how they sort of condition social development, and not least in the global south. And this was encouraging and discouraging to me, because it's obvious that the SDGs sort of creates a framework that pushes politicians to work on these issues. At the same time, it's driven mainly by NGOs and technocrats, which sort of puts the politicians in the backseat of development, which to me creates some sort of democratic deficit. That's something that we should definitely look into some more. There were also a point being made in Bolivia about, well, on the national level, politicians may not run on the SDGs, but more so on the local level. And I see this in Europe as well, like in Stockholm, it's and in Sweden in general, we see in municipalities that a lot of municipalities actually work on using the SDG framework to drive urban development, for instance. So there's definitely something there to work in the local context with politicians on the local level to push the SDGs.
Fantastic, great. Daniel, this has given us an excellent fodder for our conversation, which I'm going to just roll us right into. And please, if people feel comfortable, do pop your email in the chat. If you're like, oh, I want to follow up with that person, or I feel comfortable following up with that person. I know CAS 2030 is all about connection, so lots of great stuff there. So Daniel, let's start off with you. You're a brilliant businessman. Why have you chosen philanthropy in the political space as such an important part of what you do? Like what drew you to it, and what do you see the opportunities and challenges with it?
Well, I think, I mean, the short answer is that it's really is the meta challenge of our time. I think that if we cannot kind of revitalize democracy and politics and restore trust in our political leadership, and this is a global issue, then we're going to have a really hard time solving all of the challenges that you listed on your slide. And I think the gap that exists between the amazing engagement that we see in the young and we see in social activism and social entrepreneurship, like the people on this call and others, on the one hand, we have that engagement is greater than it's probably ever been, and at the same time, the trust in politics and trust in democracy, and these things are measured, is the lowest it's ever been. And that gap is existential. We cannot live with that gap. And therefore, to me, when I started thinking about these things and learning, not least together with you, Lisa, about kind of how can we understand this, then it became obvious that this kind of lethal spiral of low trust, disengagement, and therefore poor representation, and poor representation leading to even lower trust. The only way over time to break that vicious cycle and turn it into a virtuous one is through representation. We need to kind of broaden recruitment to politics. We need to improve representation, and therefore we felt that starting these academies, these schools for politicians, and build a bridge over the void between civil society activism on one side and politics and institutions on the other side, that is the way to, over time, restore trust in politics, bringing new voices, new people, new faces, new policies into politics. It's not a quick fix. We said from the beginning that we can start evaluating this after 10 years. We've done it now for 6 years in Sweden. We've done it for 3 years in Southern Africa. We're soon opening new academies in the Caucasus, in Paraguay, in other parts of Europe, and so on. But I think even if we can't evaluate it fully on a kind of systemic level, we already see fantastic stories and examples of people going through these programs who really change their politics locally. So I think that, to me, it's just that kind of the hopefulness in trying to bring some of the amazing energy among the kind of the young and the socially engaged people that we have into the rooms where the decisions are actually made.
Daniel, one part that's been super important to us about this work collectively that we've been doing is that we just don't limit it to just electing, focus on the elections. So the work that we do is very much centered on why you want to run, your personal leadership journey, preparing you for this, helping you get elected. But it's also, to Robert's point, who comes from the business world, and a bit from Siri, who's in the financial world, that we're missing some technocratic skills. So that full, like, how do you actually get in and be a policymaker? Now, I would think, if I'm a philanthropist that's worked on gender or water or climate, that I would make the connection between those effective, at least knowledge about these technocratic challenges and opportunities, that I would want the decision makers, financial or lawmakers, to have that. You and I have found that this space isn't flush with people throwing money at it because the meta challenge that you've identified. Why do you think that is? Is it people are afraid to be political? Is it the case hasn't been made? Is it that trust is too low, so we're stuck? So I'm just curious, like, what's the way out?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, the relationship between politics and money, over time has been really corrupt, and it's a really kind of fraught space. And most, I would say, almost all engagement of business of money into politics have been about lobbying, about the narrow self-interest. And that's obviously not what we need, but we need kind of private engagement and philanthropy engaging and business engaging in a truly non-partisan way in systems reform and systems change in institutions. We used to have, when I was younger, we used to have strong institutions and a weak civil society. Now it's the opposite, right? So we cannot, as philanthropists, we cannot just continue to support civil society only and hope that civil society in itself will be challenging enough to change the world. We need the institutions to function. We need to engage on that side. But I think there's a real fear of being kind of political and coming too close to politics among the private sector and within philanthropy. But I think it's based on a kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of how you can engage without pushing your narrow self-interest or without kind of being partisan. It's the same as with culture. I mean, you if you support culture, you're not going to write the script or do the choreography on stage, right? So you have to have the same relationship to politics, and I think there's a lack of understanding how that can be done. And then I think on your technocratic point, I mean, we need both, but I think that the main deficit in politics now is not technocratic. It's leadership, and it's visionary, and that's where the trust gets restored. Of course, you cannot have visions that aren't then executed on, and you have to have delivery as well. But I think that a lot of the lack of trust at this point is a feeling of not being represented, and that there are no politicians that understand my situation. There are no politicians that are like me, etc. And that we can see that in studies that are made.
I'm going to open it up to questions for Daniel, either about Høje Rosten, which is the program that you and Paul and many of us have been involved with in Sweden, or just in general, this philanthropy piece. One question I want to ask the audience while you're thinking about questions is, one of the challenges we're trying to understand and identify is what, obviously, if we need better people in the political system, what does better people mean, and what sort of skills and attributes do they have? So a question I want to pose to you, and maybe Johnny, you can write it in the chat as I'm doing it, is what is the unique skill or mindset that the 21st century politician needs that they've never needed before? What is the unique skill or mindset that they've never needed before? Great, Steph is coming in. I see Valerie. We are working on transforming tourism. Politicians are necessary to this change. We face challenges engaging high level when we were representing an organization. Now we've shifted to facilitating and representing a collective and feel more comfort. So humility, servant leadership, we're seeing these traits. Definitely part of our programming, right, Daniel? It's the programs that we do are grounded in that part of the belly about why you're there, and this co-creative piece we're seeing, Daniel, too, is that you don't have all the answers. We have to collectively, and I think that goes to Shakri's question around sort of how do you do this work with communities.
One thing we discussed in our breakout is that I think one of the keys to success in moving on the SDGs and those types of bigger issues is to frame them in ways that are truly nonpartisan. And I think that's more successful typically on the local level. And that was discussed, that the link is so tangible and so concrete locally to existential issues on the ground that they become naturally nonpartisan. I think it's the same. I mean, we need to break down a lot of silos. Someone wrote about co-creation here, and it's both kind of the partisan silos, but it is also the kind of sectoral silos between civil society, politics, and business, and the citizens, and that requires trust, and therefore we, the one word responses to what you think about when you hear the word politics. That is unfortunately, it's really worrying that a lot of people have lost trust, and that's going to take time to restore. But I think also, I think as citizens of our different countries, and I know there's a lot of corruption and different political systems look different, but also accepting the challenge that we over time get the politicians we deserve. It's about us, right? And I think therefore it's important not to be cynical about politics, but to actually think about how we can engage in different ways. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's really important.
Yeah, we love doing hard things, right? I think everyone who works on the SDGs and are here wouldn't be here if it's easy, probably love the challenge of it. And frankly, it's imperative. So I'm going to share just a couple slides to give people a sense. And then maybe, Matthew, let's go ahead and start with, I'm just going to pop this up. Give me 1 second. Leaving you with a couple of visuals of the work that Daniel and I just want to recognize my colleague Anna, who's the deputy director of Apolitical, my colleague Johnny, who works on programmatic stuff, and then also Paul, who's just core to the team and on the board. So we're helping building better politics just through this. We really think about it as global. And I saw someone say cross-border. You can't think about politics, even if you have to act locally, you have to think globally, climate change, mass migration. So these are some of our fellows from around the world, and really opening to partnering with people to think about how to bring all our parts of this program to what you do, very much in the local context. And there are great stories of 21st century politicians, and we call them citizen politicians a bit. We need to start telling those stories. I'm so happy that Audrey Tang came up as an example, or Jacinda Ardern, or Mayor Nasheed Nenshi from Calgary. There aren't a lot of Muslim people in his community of cowboys, and he's really brought the community together, and Chakri really given the voice. I want to talk about a good case study. And Mark Carney, who's providing some financial leadership on climate. So we got to start telling these stories. And to Daniel's point, and no one's perfect. Like, we get the ones we deserve, and we're not perfect either. So just doing that, and ask to all of you is, we've got to change the narrative by focusing on what's working in order to stop this downward cycle that Daniel was talking about around trust, right? If we only focus on what's not working. So Daniel, I think we should give our participants the last word. So Matthew, let's move pretty quickly through these last poll questions. We want to learn from you, and it's a little bit of a pop quiz just to see what's stuck in your mind. It's great feedback for us as well. So the first question is going to come up. Government, so you can just, as you do them, just keep scrolling down and hit end poll at the end. So government spend what percent of their 35 to 40% of their GDP? If you unlocked 0.5% of that more effectively, how much would that unlock? This is a quick bonus one because I only mentioned it quickly. What is the estimated 15-year impact of populist politicians on left and right GDP? Goes up 15%, neutral or down? Elections matter, and maybe we get the politicians that reflect us. An average amount of city budget an LA council member has influence over, and I showed some of those data for Johannesburg and Lisbon and Asuncion, but in LA, what is it? In 2011, X% was paid per person for leadership training in the social sector. It's really hard to know the data in this. 550 per person, or 29, using this as a proxy for political leadership, which again, we don't know that number. Number 5, so just go in your gut. What is the strongest argument you've heard on investing in better politicians? More money, better training equals better politicians. It leads to more scalable public impact. Investing in politicians protects your other philanthropic investments. This technocratic point I made. To have an outsized impact is easier than you think. Great stories about effective politicians are a good argument. If we don't, we're screwed. I think Daniel said all of them. And then just quickly, 2 more. If you could learn one more thing about building better politics, what would it be? How to start an academy near you, how to run for office yourself. I know we have at least one politician on the line, Katarina. How to help co-create with politicians, as we hear some of you are doing. How to better co-create with public servants. We heard this in Robert, actual civil servants. How do you increase their skills too? And in general, just more about how government works. We run a boot camp, helping people better understand that. And then my favorite one, are you leaving today more or less hopeful about politicians as a force multiplier for good? So we'll give you 30 more seconds. Poll closed. Share results. Okay, so good, you were listing 150 billion. Reduce is excellent, 15%, it costs money. 100% on the 700 million, that's a sticky number. 29, such good listeners. The number one argument, Daniel, you and I are gonna go out and use is all of the above. So we've got some more testing, one on each. We're screwed. Yeah. We're not gonna leave with that. You and I are too optimistic. If you could learn, how do you start an academy? So we've, contact any of us, very happy to help you. And Robert will connect on the Africa one. And are you more people, at least, no one's less, and at least 67% are more optimistic. So the very last word I'd like to say is, if you want to please tweet out something, a takeaway from this. Johnny has just in tag Catalyst 2030 and our handle, which Johnny could put in the tag. We got to spread the word that there are great politicians and they're critical to doing the work of the SDGs. And I think, Drew, I've got an idea about what we can collectively do together. And your last word, let's everyone go back on camera. We're going to wave goodbye, but put how you're feeling right now or your biggest takeaway in a word. Let's just get that wall quickly. How are you feeling right now or your biggest takeaway from today? excited, thank you, Jeru, inspired, energized, hopeful, optimistic, motivated, energized, inspired, interested, good, Suki, inspired and connected, inspired, great. Need to work more closely with governments. We're going to, Jeru, we're going to. Fantastic. Okay, since we are around the world, if everyone could go off mute, and in whatever language or whatever way you say goodbye to people, we're gonna just do a collective goodbye to everyone. So everybody off mute on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Auf Wiedersehen. Stay in touch, everyone. Ciao.